Alright, so you've just watched my video on the basics of automation and you've decided that you want to use Zapier. If you haven't watched that video yet, please definitely check it out. But we're going to be talking about the basics of Zapier today. So let's start off with what Zapier is and why you may want to use it. Starting with the what. Zapier is a connector. It is a tool that allows you to integrate different digital services together. And there's over 2,000 of them on the platform. That means that you're able to take things like Gmail, Asana, Salesforce, Acuity, Xero, and again, almost 2,000 different tools and make them talk to each other when they wouldn't otherwise do that. Now, that talking to each other means passing data from one place to another and potentially automating your workflows. Now, why would you use Zapier? Realistically, there are two answers to that question. The first one being, well, why would you use any sort of automation in general? And that's something that I talked about previously. Now, the basics of that is, one, it's going to save you time, two, it'll save you money, and three, it'll also reduce errors. So that's the basics of why you want to use automations in general, and in this case, why you want to use Zapier. Now, secondly, why would you use Zapier over all of the different other integration tools that are out there, like If This Then That, Microsoft Power Automate, Integromat, or Parabola? Well, I'm going to actually break that down in a different video, but in short, If This Then That is made primarily for consumer products. Microsoft Power Automate is made mostly for the Microsoft plethora of tools. Integromat and Parabola are a little bit newer, do have some really cool features, but they're just not as grown up and don't have as many integration opportunities as Zapier currently has. So that's why you may want to use Zapier over these other tools. Okay, so you have decided you're going to use it, now you know why and what it is. Let's talk about what the basic components of Zapier actually are. So the most basic component of Zapier is the Zap. That's just Z-A-P, Zap, and that is an automation. Now a Zap is made up of two main components, the trigger and the action. Let's talk about the trigger first. So there are three main types of triggers, and if you want to be particular, sure, you can break it up into lots of different ways if you like, but for simplicity, let's just say that there are three main types. The first and most basic type is the scheduled trigger, and that's just something that happens on a routine basis. Let's just say, for example, you'd like to be notified of something every single day, or just reminded of something. Well, that's where you're going to want to use the Schedule by Zapier utility. I'll actually show you how to use that a little bit later. The second type of trigger is the automatic trigger, and this is usually going to be the one that you're most likely to use. The automatic trigger is technically not automatic because at some point a human likely did do something to trigger this, but we're going to call it automatic because they're not manually doing something to Zapier itself. So a good example of this is maybe you have a new lead that is signed up to your blog on your website. Well, what they've done is they've gone to your website, the little pop-up has popped up, they've put in their email address, they hit the enter button, and what that did is that it sent their email address over to, let's just say MailChimp. Well, MailChimp receiving that new subscriber can be the trigger. And in that sense, it's automatic, right? Because a person didn't go to Zapier or push it to Zapier to make it happen. No, they actually just put their email address in one place, that triggered it in another, and that triggered it inside of Zapier. The third and final type of trigger, at least for this example, is the manual trigger. Now, even this is not necessarily manual in the sense that you're not logging into Zapier and having to do something that way, but it's more direct than, say, an automatic trigger. So a good example of this is what is called the Push by Zapier utility. That's something that's actually built into your browser. So the Push by Zapier utility allows you to push a little button inside of your bookmarks bar. And then from there, you can actually, say put in a content idea. That's one of my Zaps that I have here. So as soon as I think of a content idea, just push this little Push by Zapier button. I input the idea, and then I press the button to automatically send it to a Google Sheet for it to be stored for me to be able to retrieve later. So that's the trigger there. It's manual in the sense that it's going directly from me to Zapier, but again, I'm not having to log into anything or do any additional work to make that happen. So those are the three basic types of triggers: scheduled, automatic, and manual. All right, now let's talk about actions. You can break it up in any sort of particular way that you really want to if you like, but for the basics here, we're going to say that there are three main types of actions. The first type of action is, well, just an action. It's a basic action. And I know that I'm just calling an action, and by the definitions of things, you probably shouldn't do that, but whatever, it's my video, so deal with it. So the reason why I call it that is because it's truly just an action. You're just taking something and making something happen somewhere else. And the basics of that may be, let's just say for the example with MailChimp, maybe when somebody is signed up inside of your website, pushed it into MailChimp, and that has triggered your Zap, that's the trigger. What's happening is that maybe the action is to add them to your CRM, maybe add them in Salesforce. Now the second type of action is what's called a search. And this could also just be a request for information. Now instead of taking data and putting it somewhere, what you're doing is that you're taking that data and then using that to pull data from somewhere else. So a good example of that is maybe they're already in Salesforce. Maybe that you've already got their information, right? So instead of having to create something, what you're going to do is you're going to take their email address, do a lookup in something like Salesforce or any other tool that is essentially a database, pull that information in, and then maybe use it later in a different action. Now the third and final type of action is what I call a utility, or realistically a transformation. So this is taking data from previous steps, things like an email address, a block of text, maybe a date. And what it's going to do is it's going to take that data and it's going to do something to it. So it's not putting it anywhere, and it's not pulling data from anywhere. It's purely taking the data that it already has and doing something to it. So a good example of that is maybe you've gotten a block of text, and inside of that block of text you have an email address. Well, you can use the Formatter by Zapier utility to pull out, realistically in that case extract, an email address from the text. You can also do things like format a date. So maybe you have a date in one particular time zone, or maybe just in one particular format, and you want to make it pretty to send in an email. Well, you can use Formatter by Zapier for that as well, or other sorts of utilities that allow you to modify data. So those are the three types of actions. The basic action, which is just taking data and putting it somewhere, like a specific service that you want it to go to make it do something. The second type of action, of course, is a search. It's just a lookup. You're trying to pull data from somewhere else so you can use it in a different action later on. Then, of course, the third type of action is the transformation. Now, that is where you're taking data, you're doing something to it, and you're going to use it later somewhere else. Okay, so just as a recap, we've gone over what Zapier is, why you would use it, the basic components of it. I will be going into further detail on comparing Zapier to other tools, as well as getting into further detail about the specific utilities and different ways that you can actually use it in the future. So make sure to look out for those videos. And the best thing you can do to look out for those videos is subscribe and then click that little bell icon. I know it's super annoying for me to tell you this, but do that, because otherwise you're going to miss these videos and you're just going to be sitting in Zapier like, oh, what's happening? Don't do that. I'm here to help you, I promise. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please keep tuning in. Leave me with feedback, comments, questions, everything, input, all the things that you can in the comments below. Let me know what you think. I'm always trying to make these things better, and have a wonderful day.